Would you trade DeAndre Ayton this offseason? Because this guy would. Let me explain. The Phoenix Suns are one of the greatest NBA rebuilds of recent memory. Okay, to be fair, it took a really long time, winning less than 25 games for 4 straight seasons before a miraculous 8-0 run in the bubble that set them up to be one of the best teams in the league for the past 2 seasons. With the addition of Chris Paul turning them into a legitimate title contender overnight after being kind of the joke of the league for the last 10 or so years. But you know what else really helped Phoenix finish with the second best record in the league last year, make the finals, and be the best team in the league this year? A former #1 overall pick. DeAndre Ayton feels like the forgotten man on this team, but his value on both ends of the floor really can't be overstated. So why are they considering moving him this offseason? My name is Tucker. Thanks for clicking on the video, by the way. I really appreciate it. At this point, some of you might be thinking that I'm making this up. There's no way that the Suns are actually considering moving DeAndre Ayton this offseason. Well, it's even worse than that. It has been widely reported that they actively explored trade conversations about moving him at the deadline this season. Now, those discussions never really got too far. They explored a Domantas Sabonis DeAndre Ayton swap, but mostly they were setting themselves up for a possible Ayton trade this offseason. And given his value to this team, how important he is defensively, how great he is as a rim roller alongside Chris Paul, the way that this team is constructed with a fantastic backcourt of Paul and Booker, Bridges on the wings, shooters everywhere else, and DeAndre Ayton as the roll man and the anchor defensively, there's really no need to explore a massive shakeup to this roster. Well, that's true for every team in the league that doesn't have Robert Sarver as their owner. This has been a theme of Phoenix Suns basketball since he's owned the team, going back to the 7 seconds or less Steve Nash era Suns, where they gave away first-round picks to try and save money. They made multiple moves that actively limited their chances of winning a title or making the finals. Moves that include trading away Joe Johnson because they could not come to an agreement on a new contract, which sounds awfully similar to this Ayton situation. Man, Johnson would have been awesome on those Suns teams. Now, the Suns did get 2 first-round picks back in exchange for Johnson, but they were notoriously bad with picks during that time period as well, famously giving away the draft rights to Rajon Rondo in 2006 because they simply didn't want to pay the salary of a first-round pick. Yet those teams still became one of the most memorable groups of the last 20 years in the league and almost made multiple finals trips despite literally giving away assets like Johnson and Rondo. And you could argue that if they had a different owner during that era of Suns basketball, they would have made the finals, they would have won a title, because they wouldn't have given away picks that became players like Rajon Rondo during that era. And that stinginess could now extend to this current era of Suns basketball. Like I said, it's been a miraculous turnaround for them to get to where they are. But the problem is they now have basically 3.5 max players on their roster between Chris Paul, Devin Booker, Mikal Bridges, who's the half, and DeAndre Ayton, who is looking for a max rookie contract extension, similar to other players in his draft class like Luka, like Trey, that have received max extensions. He wants the same thing. And like Luka and like Trey, he had the opportunity to sign an extension this past offseason, and him and Phoenix never came to an agreement. They couldn't figure out a number that worked for both sides. And ultimately that came down to Phoenix and Robert Sarver, the owner, not being willing to step up and pay him the full max. Reason being, they don't want to be in the luxury tax. They understand how much it's going to cost to keep this group together over the long term, because every single one of these players, Booker, Paul, Bridges, and then Ayton, if he signed a new deal, would be under contract for the next couple of seasons. And yes, it would be a massive luxury tax bill for this team, specifically for a team that's not located in New York or LA. But it's not that simple. It's not just that they don't want to pay Ayton specifically, or they don't want to go into the luxury tax, because they've been willing to pay other players on their roster. There were rumors that they might try and finesse their way around a Chris Paul deal where they would move him somewhere else or not pay him nearly what he's worth, but they paid him. Booker got the rookie max. Mikal Bridges got a significant contract extension as well. And so there's an argument to be made that this is player specific and position specific for DeAndre Ayton, because even though he is incredibly valuable to this team as a rim roller, as an anchor in the middle, as someone that can guard defensively, can switch out on pick and rolls, really provides them balance on the floor so that they're not so perimeter oriented, and their late game execution with him on the floor is fantastic. But this also just comes down to the value of the modern center in the NBA. It's a position that has increasingly gone down in value over the last handful of seasons as the game has pushed more towards the perimeter. And it's basically you roll to the rim and you finish at the rim and you defend, and those are your roles if you're a big guy, and unless your name is Nikola Jokic or Joel Embiid. Those are the only 2 guys that are holding on to this low post game offensive focal point type of role. And even in that way, you could argue that Jokic is more of a perimeter player than he is a big guy because of how much playmaking responsibility he has for his team. And unless you're one of those guys, unless you're a legitimate MVP candidate at the 5 spot, you could argue that paying someone like DeAndre Ayton, who's not on the level of those guys, a max contract doesn't make any sense. Because as of right now, here's a list of players that are true centers, true fives, that are on a max contract in the league right now. It's Joel Embiid, it's Nikola Jokic, it's Rudy Gobert, the defensive player of the year caliber 5-man, and Karl-Anthony Towns, who signed a rookie max extension. Every other 5-man in the league is not on a max. So in that conversation, Ayton would have to be considered a top 5 center in the entire league to be eligible, quite frankly, for a max contract. Here are the other highest paid centers, true centers in the league: Al Horford, Nikola Vucevic, Jared Allen, Clint Capella, Miles Turner, Steven Adams, and Jonas Valanciunas. There are only 7 centers in the league as of right now that make over $20 million, and there are only 10 that make over $15 million. And when you compare that to every single other position in the league, 1, 2, 3, 4, perimeter guys, guards, wings, doesn't matter. There are a massive amount more players like that are considered incredibly valuable, even non-stars that are getting incredibly large numbers from a contract perspective in comparison to centers, simply because of the way the league values them. Now, granted, you also don't really need more than 2 centers on the roster in any given year because of the way that the positions work, and most teams only play one big guy at a time now, so that certainly brings down those overall numbers. But I think it also speaks to how the league views this position and how ultimately the Suns are viewing Ayton's role within this team. Like I said, he's not an offensive focal point. He's never going to be one so long as Devin Booker and Chris Paul are the backcourt in Phoenix. Their offense is going to run through those 2 guys, and Ayton's never going to have the usage required, or probably the skills required, to be someone on the level of Joel Embiid or Nikola Jokic. And so short of that, you either have to be a defensive player of the year caliber player the way Rudy Gobert is. And by the way, I think that contract's a mistake anyway, even given the fact that he is one of the max centers in the league, or Karl-Anthony Towns, who is an incredible spacer, just won the 3-point contest as a big man, and is incredibly skilled offensively, and some people think that that's an overpay for the 5 spot. Because here's what it comes down to. If it's not Nikola Jokic, and it's not Joel Embiid, every other center that I've talked about in this video, including DeAndre Ayton, you can get 80 to 85% of what they do for $6 to $7 million, or maybe even less than that. There are so many 5s available. There are so many that fill the very specific role that the modern NBA has laid out for them, that you don't need to invest in that kind of player in order to get 80 to 85% of value out of that spot. And so as a result, Phoenix is actively going to look to move DeAndre Ayton this offseason, whether it be in exchange for a player that makes less, like Domantas Sabonis, whether it be reinvesting in a different position and then trying to move some money around to find a 5-man that works for them. You've seen other guys randomly show up to their team like Bismack Biyombo and play well at the 5 spot, which is another argument against paying Ayton the max. But here's the bottom line for me. I understand everything that I just laid out as an argument against paying DeAndre Ayton the max. But when you have a team that is, by almost every metric, the best team in the entire league in the regular season, and you have a legitimate chance to win a title, you can't mess around with that. You can't go into the offseason and say, we're going to trade one of our 4 best players because we don't want to pay him a max and we don't want to be in a luxury tax for 2 to 3 seasons. You have a 2-season window, basically, at this point, assuming Chris Paul can continue to be awesome, of being a real legitimate title contender. And there are 25 other teams in the league that are doing their absolute best to have some kind of 2-year window sometime in the next decade, and you're in that window right now. You can't mess around with that. You can't start thinking, oh, well, we can shave money here by letting Jalen Smith go and not picking up his 3rd-year option as a rookie. We can move some other things around and not be in a luxury tax. There are other teams in the league that are more than willing, teams like Milwaukee, that are more than willing to pay a ton of money for their group because they have a chance to win the title, and it paid off for them. None of that other stuff matters from a basketball perspective if you are in that real legitimate title contending window. And Phoenix is certainly there based off being the best team in the league this year and making the finals last year. Now, logistically, yeah, there's an argument to be made that you can move on from Ayton, get 80-85% of the value that he provides while also not paying him the max, replacing him with someone else, potentially moving him for someone that helps your team as a full-time 4 potentially on this roster. Yeah, there's an argument to be made for that. But that's a lot of moving pieces. It's a lot of ifs to try and circle your way back to being a title contending team still, while also not being in the luxury tax and not paying a player like Ayton a max. That's a lot of things to shuffle around and have your fingers crossed that you still end up as a title contending team rather than just continuing to run it back with this team. But at the end of the day, given the history in Phoenix, I absolutely think it's realistic to expect them to explore trading DeAndre Ayton this offseason, whether it be a Sabonis swap like we've seen before. Obviously, now he's in Sacramento, whether it be for a wing, whether it be for a forward, whether it be for another 5-man that's simply cheaper. Maybe they send him to Atlanta for Capella and someone else. I just wouldn't be surprised at this point. We've seen time after time, granted, they stepped up and paid Chris Paul, but we've seen time after time this group in Phoenix not step up when they truly need to. And maybe if they win the title, that will change. But if they don't, I would not be surprised at all if this roster looks drastically different next year than it has this year. That's the end of the video. My name is Tucker. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I will see you all next time.